Some stories begin with a scream, others with a whisper, and this one began with silence, so heavy it pressed against the walls of a cliffside mansion, overlooking the restless Atlantic, the kind of silence money buys and fear maintains. And if you stay with me until the end of this story, you will understand how even the most powerful man can fall when the truth refuses to stay buried. So, before we begin, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this deserve to be heard all the way through. The Harrington estate stood high above the rocky shores of Newport, a palace of white stone and glass that caught the sunrise like a crown. From the outside, it was perfection: manicured gardens, private security, charity, galas glittering beneath crystal chandeliers. Inside lived Evelyn Harrington, wife of billionaire biotech investor Richard Harrington, a man whose name opened doors in Washington and silenced rooms on Wall Street. To the public, Evelyn was poised and graceful, always a step behind her husband at events, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile carefully measured. But behind the locked gates and reinforced doors, life followed a different script. There were rules in that house, written but absolute. Speak only when spoken to. Never contradict, never question. Bruises bloomed where fabric could hide them. Apologies were demanded. Staff moved like shadows, eyes lowered, ears trained to forget. Cameras lined the exterior grounds but never the private halls. Richard curated his image with ruthless precision. Interviews about innovation, speeches about philanthropy, donations to women's empowerment funds that made headlines, while his own wife learned to walk without limping before public appearances. Evelyn stopped asking why a long time ago. Survival replaced hope. She learned the rhythm of his moods, the tightening of his jaw that signaled danger, the softness that meant he needed admiration. She mapped the mansion in her mind, like a prisoner memorizing exits, waiting for a moment that might never come. The unraveling began on a Tuesday, so ordinary it felt almost cruel. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, scattering diamonds across the marble floor. Richard left early for a conference in Boston, cameras flashing as he kissed Evelyn's cheek and praised her unwavering support. The front doors closed, engines faded, and the house exhaled. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, slicing strawberries with steady hands that betrayed nothing of the storm inside her. What Richard never noticed was that Evelyn had stopped being afraid weeks earlier. Fear had sharpened into something else: clarity. In a rarely used West Wing, behind a locked study Richard believed only he could access, Evelyn had discovered what he had spent years hiding. A concealed panel behind a bookshelf revealed a safe room, filled not with cash or jewels, but with folders, names, photographs, contracts, settlement agreements, stamped confidential. Messages from women who once trusted him and then disappeared from his orbit without explanation. Some had signed silence in exchange for money. Some had simply vanished from public record. And in a hidden drive tucked behind the safe, video files, violence, dressed up as control. Evelyn did not scream. She did not confront him. She copied everything. Every file transferred to encrypted storage. Every document photographed. She built a timeline, cross-referenced names, reached out quietly through anonymous channels. When she vanished 3 days later, the world assumed scandal or tragedy. Headlines speculated about a kidnapping. Richard appeared before cameras with trembling hands and red-rimmed eyes, pleading for her safe return. Offering rewards, performing heartbreak with convincing precision. But inside the estate, something had shifted. The housekeeper, Sophia Alvarez, who had served the Harringtons for 12 years, could no longer swallow her silence. She remembered the late-night arguments, the shattered glass. The way Evelyn once whispered, "I'm sorry," when she had done nothing wrong. Sophia stepped forward with photographs she had secretly taken of bruises while helping Evelyn dress. The groundskeeper admitted to seeing unfamiliar women escorted out the back gate over the years. A former assistant released emails that hinted at darker truths. And then, just as the pressure reached its peak, Evelyn returned, not in secret, not in fear, but under federal protection. She walked through the same grand doors she had once crossed in silence, her head high, her voice steady. Cameras flashed again, but this time she did not stand behind Richard. She stood apart. Investigators followed her into the West Wing, into the hidden room, into the vault of evidence Richard believed was untouchable. The files were verified. The videos authenticated. Women across the country began to speak, their stories aligning like pieces of a puzzle too long ignored. The courtroom months later was nothing like the glittering ballrooms Richard once commanded. There were no applause lines, no curated applause. There was only testimony. Evelyn spoke calmly, describing years of control, intimidation, isolation. She did not exaggerate. She did not break. Her composure unsettled him more than tears ever could. Financial records exposed payments made to bury allegations. Private investigators testified about intimidation tactics. Former partners recounted threats disguised as negotiations. Richard's empire began to fracture under scrutiny. Investors withdrew. Board members resigned. The man who once shaped narratives found himself trapped inside one he could not rewrite. When the verdict was read, 42 years without parole for multiple counts of assault, coercion, and obstruction, there was no dramatic outburst. Richard simply stared forward, as if waiting for someone to correct a mistake. But there was no mistake. The mansion above the cliffs was seized, its gates locked by federal order. Auction signs replaced security patrols. The silence that once protected cruelty dissolved into something else: relief. Evelyn did not keep the estate. She did not fight for assets. Instead, she established a foundation using the restitution funds awarded in civil court, dedicated to legal aid and safe housing for survivors of domestic abuse. She spoke at conferences not about revenge, but about awareness, about how power can disguise harm, about how silence can be the most dangerous weapon of all. She never raised her voice. She did not need to. Her strength lay in clarity, in documentation, in refusing to disappear the way others had. Years later, when asked why she returned instead of fleeing quietly, she answered simply, "Because if I stayed silent, someone else would suffer." The cliffs of Newport still face the ocean, waves crashing against stone, indifferent to human pride. But the estate that once symbolized untouchable wealth now stands as a reminder that no fortune is large enough to bury truth forever. Evelyn rebuilt her life in a smaller home by the water, where windows opened without fear and doors did not need codes to feel secure. She found peace not in headlines, but in mornings without dread. She ended the story not with vengeance, but with exposure. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage sometimes grows quietly behind closed doors, make sure you subscribe and support stories that give survivors their voice back, because the most powerful endings are the ones where silence finally breaks.